this webinar is going to be about the City of San Antonio's new deconstruction ordinance. And we're also excited to be offering continuing education credits for AIA members participating in this webinar. Jessica is going to provide some information about credits if you need to apply for those. My name is Samantha Hunnick, and I serve as the programs coordinator here at Preservation Texas. Before we get started, I wanted to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded, and that recording is going to be posted on your online Preservation Texas account portal, so that you can go back and rewatch it later if you want to. And you can access that portal by visiting preservationtexas.org/login. Also, we will be having a Q&A session after the presentation, so feel free to drop any questions that you have at any time during the webinar. You can do that by using the Q&A button that's located in your Zoom toolbar, and we'll have some time to address those questions at the end. Your speaker and presenter for today's webinar is Jessica Anderson. Jessica is the Assistant Program Manager for Deconstruction and Circular Economy in the City of San Antonio's Office of Historic Preservation. In this role, she reviews demolition requests, helps owners and contractors navigate the city's deconstruction ordinance, and assists with coordination of deconstruction contractor trainings. Prior to that, she was a case manager for Scout SA, the Landmark and Historic District designations arm of the Office of Historic Preservation, before moving to the design review team, where she evaluated proposed repairs and modifications to historic structures, as well as plans for new construction in historic districts. Jessica earned an MS in Historic Preservation from the University of Texas at Austin. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Sam. I never think about my bio having to be read out loud, and I need to make that a little shorter for things like this. I'm sorry, Sam. Let me share my screen real quick. All right. Okay. So as Sam said, my name is Jessica. I work with the Deconstruction and Circular Economy program here in San Antonio's Office of Historic Preservation. I've been with the office for about almost 7 years now, and also, as Sam mentioned, in sort of different capacities in the office, with design review, designations, demolition review, and now deconstruction. I'm also an incredibly nervous presenter, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm glad to answer them as we go. I'd much rather chat with you all than lecture to you, so just let me know if you have questions as we move through the presentation. This is the continuing ed statements that are required by AIA. Biggest takeaway here is that in order to receive your credits, make sure you email Jesus, jesus@preservationtexas.org with your name and AIA member number, and then he'll report all of y'all's participation to AIA so that you can get that credit. Some learning objectives for today. Understanding policy and regulations. So I'm going to give you sort of a high-level overview of our deconstruction ordinance and how it might impact projects here in San Antonio. We're going to talk a little bit about how preservation and deconstruction kind of go hand in hand, and how decon can be a good tool in achieving preservation goals. We're going to talk about maximizing the benefits of deconstruction, talk a little bit about the environmental, cultural, and social benefits of our deconstruction ordinance and program. And then my favorite part is how we share information about what we learn from deconstruction. I'm really into things like property research and also social media and outreach in that capacity. So I'm excited to show you guys some examples of how we've used what we uncovered during decon to sort of spread the word about preservation. So I think, traditionally a lot of folks think of preservation as this sort of dichotomy between preservation in situ or demolition or loss of a structure. And all of us in this room, as practicing preservationists, know that it's a lot more nuanced than that. And so through our collective work, we found all of these other options that sort of fall under that umbrella of preservation, things like adaptive reuse, relocation. Those of us who live in coastal areas think about things like elevating properties to make them more flood and hurricane hardy. And deconstruction and reuse is really part of that sort of toolbox that preservationists can use to extend the life of buildings and materials. And our office sort of has the unique ability to take all of the different programs that are housed under OHP to kind of inform how we approach deconstruction and circular economy. So as I mentioned, Stephanie, my supervisor, Stephanie Phillips, who is the program manager for Decon, she and I both come from a background where we did design review for new construction. We've done design review for modifications to structures that are already designated historic. I've worked with Scout SA to do individual landmark designation, worked a little bit on district designation. And then I've also been involved in demolition review for much of my time with OHP. And so we're using all of this sort of collective knowledge about building life cycles to inform how we're approaching this new deconstruction and circular economy program that's now embedded in OHP. And the way that we think of this is that deconstruction is a demolition alternative and not a preservation alternative. So when we talk about deconstruction in OHP, it's because we have exhausted all of our other reviews, all of the other sort of powers that were given under Unified Development Code to preserve a structure. The structure is not eligible for designation for whatever reason. And the structure is of a certain age, and so it falls under our deconstruction guidelines. So we're not evaluating structures for deconstruction until after it's already been evaluated for designation. I think this is a really important point for our office because a lot of deconstruction programs and deconstruction ordinances that are in the US right now are housed within sort of planning and maybe aren't coming from that same kind of preservation perspective, but we can really use this body of knowledge to inform how we're approaching this. I have a video for you.
This is the story of two homes. They both provide their family shelter and places to make memories. But in time, some may think the lives of these homes are over. The first house gets demolished. Its lumber, windows, doors, bricks, all of it is buried in a landfill and will decay for hundreds of years. This is a waste of more than 41 tons of energy that was used to create the materials that went into the house. That's equivalent to driving your car nearly 93,000 miles, or almost 4 times around the world in greenhouse gas emissions. Construction and demolition waste is the largest source of waste sent to landfills nationally, more than double the household trash we throw out. Wasting building materials by demolition leads to deforestation. It destroys ecosystems and decreases our air quality. In the past decade, the demolition of homes in San Antonio has created over 169,000 tons of waste. That's equivalent to over 100,000 hippos. But it doesn't have to be this way. Remember the other house? It's on the path for deconstruction, meaning its building materials will be taken apart and reused. Like an organ donor, this home's parts will give new life to other buildings. Its bricks and lumber were used as affordable alternatives to repair a home. Its windows were installed in a bakery. Its beautiful old-growth wood is now the flooring in a trendy new restaurant. And with a fresh coat of paint, its front door is now the top of a family's dining room table. It's estimated that reuse, refurbishment, and upcycling generate about 300 jobs for every 10,000 tons of material, meaning that, on average, deconstruction employs 6 times more people than demolition. Deconstruction produces jobs in manufacturing, retail, and building trades, creating a cycle of reuse for building materials. We can protect the future of our older homes and buildings by using materials from their past. This nurtures a healthy environment, continues the legacy of our city's built heritage, and keeps quality materials out of our landfills. San Antonio can lead the way for cities across the world, and it starts with our buildings today. Don't demolish, deconstruct, and reuse. It's the earth-friendly alternative.
With all of this in mind, our office is really looking, as I mentioned, at deconstruction as a demolition alternative. So we saw these houses that were coming down regardless, sort of reduced to this pile of non-reusable lumber, bricks, rubble that you see in the left photo. But if you take a step back, these houses are really, as the video says, organ donors, that we can take pieces of them, put them into other projects in the city, put them on the market for resale and reuse, and keep all of those materials out of the landfill. Something I like to remind folks too, and this is maybe one of the most fun things about this job, is that we're constantly finding examples of historic salvage and reuse in projects across the city. So one of our contractors, Emily, she works for a local demolition company. She was taking down this house, and as the sheetrock came down, she noticed clear evidence that these structures had been built from reclaimed materials. This house, I think, was 1915-ish, more or less. And you can see here the evidence of, sort of joists in the paint on the shiplap on the walls. So just clear signs of lumber reuse in this historic residence. And then this example is from our Material Innovation Center. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we have an MOU with Port San Antonio here in the south part of San Antonio to use their facilities for our Material Innovation Center, which right now is essentially storage of our tools that we use for Rehaborama program, for our Living Heritage Trades Academy, and it's also where we house materials that are either donated to us from deconstruction sites or were salvaged from city-ordered demolitions. So the photo at the left is one of the garage bays where we store all these reclaimed materials. And so you can see there, same evidence that this was reclaimed lumber. And then in the ceiling of one of the bungalows in the neighborhood, you can see this old address, Fairchild Aircraft, Hagerstown, Maryland. And so this is another base that they shipped materials to Port SA, and then somebody reused those materials in the construction of this building. And it's actually part of sort of the story of this bungalow colony as well. It's on the National Register, and there's a part of that narrative that talks about reuse of materials to build the garages and homes in this bungalow colony. So around 2017, OHP was charged with investigating alternatives to demolition. There's a lot of concern in the city at that time about how many demolitions were occurring. I think in 2018, 2019, we were looking at about 400 to 450 demolitions per year. That's since increased to about 600 to 650 a year. And then in 2018, we got a working group together to investigate deconstruction as an alternative to demolition. And then after many years of work by those who came before me in decon, namely Stephanie and our director, Shannon Miller, City Council adopted a deconstruction ordinance in September of 2022. It's actually September 8th. So we just had our 2-year anniversary of the deconstruction ordinance. And these are some of the reasons that we presented for why it was important to adopt this ordinance. So one reason is for the environment. As our video stated, construction and demolition waste accounts for a huge amount of the waste found in landfills, equivalent to the sort of carbon impact of driving 93,000 miles. That landfilling puts pressure on, native plants and animals. It destroys ecosystems. And then because of, there's still demand for lumber for new construction, it contributes to things like deforestation as well. So since the introduction of the deconstruction ordinance, 53 structures have been deconstructed, and that equates to about 100,000 tons of material salvaged and diverted from the landfill. Well, I think that should say 100,000 pounds. I think it's 50 tons of material. Sorry for my typo. Another issue is sort of community health. So traditional demolition results in a lot of airborne dust particles. It results in sort of, hazardous materials making its way into water table. And oftentimes those impacts are felt most by sort of disproportionately traditionally excluded communities here in San Antonio. So avoiding demolition keeps a lot of that dust and debris out of the air and out of the water. And then it also impacts things like affordable housing. So having access to affordable building materials is really important to retaining sort of historically and what we call like naturally occurring affordable housing. So when we are able to redirect materials out of the landfill and towards community use, that marketplace improves and becomes more accessible and more affordable for folks who want to age in place, who want to stay in like their multi-generational home. And again, we use this organ donor analogy a lot, but even though a building has reached the end of its life, the bits and pieces can still be reused to help extend the lives of other buildings and other homes in our community. And as an example, so part of our charge with the Material Innovation Center is partnering with Neighborhood and Housing Services, which is another department in the city of San Antonio that works under HUD funding to rehabilitate structures or rehabilitate homes rather. It's called Owner-Occupied Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Program. And so we're really focusing on the rehabilitation part here. But this house on West Theo was a city ordered demolition through our Dangerous Premise and Building Standards Board. So they ordered demolition of this structure. Our program went out to review the house for deconstruction because it fell within the age parameters of our deconstruction ordinance. And at that inspection, our city demolition contractor, Jesse's pictured here, he pulled back some of this vinyl siding, and underneath the vinyl and underneath the styrofoam sheeting below that, we found this really nice 105 siding that was in great condition. You all know the sort of like blessing and curse of vinyl. You know, it's terrible for the environment, not particularly attractive, but it does a great job of protecting historic materials if it's installed over wood siding. And so we have, because our office also reviews Section 106 letters for that federal funding under the HUD program, under owner-occupied rehab, we were able to match the siding materials from this house with another project that was receiving funds from owner-occupied rehab. And so we were able to salvage those like old growth, high quality siding materials and install them in another house to help extend the life of this home. And this is something that my supervisor Steph says all the time: the landfill doesn't deserve these materials, our community does. Another important aspect of this is workforce development. When this ordinance was introduced, we knew as an office that part of our charge was going to be to make sure that we had the people available and trained to do deconstruction, so that when the ordinance became active, we would have people who were trained, who knew how to take down a house appropriately and who could meet the requirements of the ordinance, that it be a certified deconstruction contractor. And as it notes here, for every 10,000 tons of material, demolition creates 1 job, recycling creates 30, but the deconstruction, reuse, salvage, upcycling industries create 300 jobs per 10,000 tons of material. And it creates local jobs in things like trades, warehousing, reuse and retail, and then a lot of creative reuse sort of opportunities or value-added manufacturing, like making furniture or art out of the reclaimed materials from these houses. And I'm going to make you watch another video about our deconstruction contractor training.
We are here on a property on Fitzhugh Road, which is owned by the San Antonio River Authority. And we are conducting a deconstruction training program in partnership between the Office of Historic Preservation and the San Antonio River Authority's property here.
I think it's an awesome experience. I've learned a lot. As far as resalvaging wood, it's going to be beneficial to us. The tools, the knowledge that they've been sharing with us, you know, taking us out. I never imagined we could take a roof off from the attic out. You know, I was, when I got up there and started doing it, I was like, wow, okay. You know, so it's been a real experience. A lot of knowledge has been poured out, and knowledge that we could take back and use for our stores and for anybody else that's out there, you know, that wants to do this kind of stuff.
I'm new at this, and so just working with the material, it almost has a life of itself. Like when you're trying to pull a board off, it's almost like it doesn't want to leave home. but it has to, because otherwise it's gonna go in a dumpster. And we're also saving the environment by not having to cut down trees and throwing the material in the landfill.
What we see is that a portion of our materials is going right back into the buildings, and then another portion is going into craft materials and craft goods, home goods, things which will be cherished, a family table that you'll sit around for generations, heirloom items. These are really beautiful materials, and often they're best served by being accessible, touchable, visible. For folks who are interested in getting involved, there's a million ways to do so, and you don't have to swing a hammer to get involved in deconstruction. You need people at every level, working in policy, working in advocacy, education, business. Get in touch with the OHP. Your Office of Historic Preservation is going to be hosting many trainings just like this one.
So since our first training in 2019, we've offered 4 deconstruction trainings and we've certified 32 deconstruction contractors. That includes both individuals and local contractor, demolition contractor businesses. We actually have 2 more trainings coming up next month. And something newer and really cool that we've done is partnered with a local entity called Family Service to offer paid trainings and apprenticeships for folks who qualify. It's basically workforce training for the city of San Antonio. The folks who join via that program, their training fee is waived, so the registration fee for the contractor training is waived. And then they also actually receive a weekly stipend for completing the training and then doing the subsequent apprenticeship with a deconstruction contractor who's already working in the field. And then something else that I think is really cool is we've already had our sort of first generation of someone who is a deconstruction contractor trained by our office. We always use Repurpose Savannah typically to help train our contractors. But one of those trained contractors actually recently led a deconstruction training that focused on a commercial interior just a few months ago. So it was really cool to see this sort of like first generation of trainers enter the workplace too. And also, demolition and deconstruction matter for the economy. Sending these materials to the landfill is inherently devaluing. And it also kind of reduces buildings to, a bunch of materials or a structure that has no further use. And these resources are lost then as a result of demolition. And it really sort of reaffirms this sort of, as it says here, a take, make, waste economic system. Whereas reclaimed materials are almost immediately available. They're not subject to things like supply chains. I'm sure that you all, you saw what happened with lumber prices over the pandemic. Reuse also generates local economic prosperity. And we see that in the businesses that have developed from this. So we have one contractor right now who she's certified, she's working with a larger deconstruction company, but she and one of her apprentices from the Family Services program are exploring sort of breaking off and starting her own deconstruction business, lumber yard, things like this. So, by introducing this as sort of a field, we're really spurring sort of business growth, economic growth locally here in San Antonio. And lastly, demolition is a form of community erasure. So here in San Antonio, luckily our Office of Historic Preservation, we reviewed every single demolition in the city of San Antonio. Right now, it's basically me and like 1 or 2 other people in my office who review demolitions, whether they're private, owner requests for demolition or city ordered requests for demolition. And there was a lot of community concern about how many demolitions were taking place. As I mentioned, when we were sort of first charged with exploring deconstruction, we were seeing 400, 450 demolitions per year. And so we understand that, not every home is able to be saved. Not every home is eligible for designation, but that doesn't mean that the materials aren't valuable to the community. And by deconstructing, it sort of allows us an opportunity to slowly learn about the building. We can learn about the methods used to construct it. If we're lucky, we see sort of hand of the maker and learn a little bit about the people who built these houses. And then through the course of demolition review, we can also learn about the people who lived here. So it really helps us document these communities that are feeling the loss, documenting the sort of lived experiences of the people who resided there and who built these properties too. And we can share that information with the community as well, as I'll talk about later. So if you can't restore a structure, consider deconstructing it for all of these reasons we just discussed: environment, health, workforce, economy, housing, and cultural heritage. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but don't be scared to put them in there. I'm glad to answer them as we go. Okay, so as I mentioned, in 2017, we were given this charge to explore alternatives to demolition. And ultimately that resulted in our deconstruction ordinance. So this is the largest, most encompassing deconstruction ordinance in North America. And we presented it in phases. So when it went into effect October 1st, it was for demolitions citywide that were built in 1920 or earlier for, I'm sorry, let me restate this. So the first phase was the city ordered demolitions for residences built in 1920 or earlier citywide, or for 1945 and earlier for properties that are either already designated historic, whether that's through individual designation or as part of a local historic district, or for our neighborhood conservation districts. And then on January 1st, 2023, which is the sort of phase of it that we're currently in, that expanded to include all demolitions, both city ordered and owner requested, for any residential properties that were fourplex or smaller, built in 1920 or earlier citywide, or 1945 and earlier for historic properties or those neighborhood conservation districts. And then on January 1st of next year, this is expanding even further to include all demolitions citywide residential properties, 8plex or smaller, that were built in 1945 or earlier, and then 1960 or earlier for landmark properties or properties in conservation districts. And that includes all structures on the property. So not just the primary structure, but any sort of accessory structures, detached garages, things like that, that fall under those date parameters. And just sort of to quickly note, our office convened a working group in 2018 to discuss sort of all these issues we went through earlier about the benefits of demolition, or I'm sorry, deconstruction versus demolition. And we asked for the input and sort of partnership with all of these organizations here in town. So Solid Waste has been a huge partner for us, Office of Sustainability, a natural partner, and then also things like development services. In San Antonio, they're the ones who handle all of the permitting for projects. Neighborhood and Housing Services, as I mentioned before, who administer the HUD-funded programs and sort of owner-occupied rehab programs. Build San Antonio Green, Habitat for Humanity. We've gotten some grant funding through ACOG, the Alamo Area Council of Governments. And then we also really relied on feedback from the sort of local industry partners. So our demolition contractors, developers, real estate professionals, to help us think about how this might impact work here in San Antonio. And then part of the outcome of this is that for the city ordered demolitions in San Antonio, part of that requirement is that all salvage materials are retained by the city and housed at the Material Innovation Center. So this is sort of the solution that we devised for housing all these materials coming out of the city ordered demolitions. As I mentioned, it's a space at Port SA. It's the Kelly Airfield bungalows. They're all built around 1920. It's, oh gosh, Steph's in here somewhere. I can't remember how many homes there are, but it's basically a group of craftsman homes that were built to house military generals and their families. And then it also had this large garage at the south end of the neighborhood. And as I mentioned earlier, that's where all of these materials live. It's where we go when neighborhoods and housing are looking for a match to some material on one of their project houses. And everybody drops off their materials post-decon there for the city order demolitions. Okay, this is my favorite part. So my background with Scout SA it really sort of led me to love property research. And so that includes things like researching local businesses. And that's something that we're constantly getting information about through deconstruction and salvage. And Steph and I really love sharing this information with the community, mostly through social media. So here's a couple of recent examples. I spoke about this one earlier, but our contractor provided these photos from the site showing that salvage materials were part of historic house building. So this was a project on Lenaro Street in the Palm Heights neighborhood, built 1919 by Campbell Lumber. I didn't include it here, but there was a nice little lumber stamp in the house showing Campbell Lumber. And so this is a lot of information, this information about historic salvage and reuse, about the companies that built this house that would have likely been lost through traditional demolition. But because we're carefully dismantling the house, we have time to pause and gather and document all of this information and share it on social media. This is our most recent post. I thought this was really fun. So same contractor was pulling finishes inside the house, and the homeowner lost a window weight and sort of devised this solution to window weight by wiring together 3 crescent wrenches and using that for a window weight instead of the sort of traditional cast iron ones that we see in windows. Really genius solution. It worked for them for decades. The window was still operable when it was removed. So a really fun look at sort of the life of this house and the decisions made by previous property owners. This is another house where, actually this was this is one of the deconstruction training houses. So our office has identified properties when we're coming up towards, deconstruction training, which typically happens in the spring and then around October. And this was a house that was owned by a company, and they were required to deconstruct it, and we entered into an agreement to have it be one of our training sites. So as the folks from Repurpose Savannah and the trainees were removing materials, they saw these lumber stamps, including the phone number. I assume everybody is familiar, but this is a really common practice for lumber yards. You imagine somebody trucking their lumber down the street, paint one of the slabs with your phone number and your business name so they know where that lumber came from. Sort of a way to advertise the business as they're transporting materials across town or storing them on site. And so we can see who built this, or who provided the lumber for this structure. And then we can learn a little bit about, the company too. And this is something that's really resonated well on social media for us. People like to hear about local businesses. This one had a tie to Maury Maverick, really prominent San Antonian. And as you can see here, we got 130 likes on this post. I got posted on Facebook as well. I'm not sure how many likes or engagement I got there, but these always do really well and really resonate with folks because you're sort of highlighting not only the house itself, but sort of the folks who made it. So somebody donated a bunch of window weights to the Material Innovation Center, and we saw that they were stamped Alamo. And so this, sort of gave me an opportunity to go down the rabbit hole of researching Alamo Ironworks, which was a local company. They had been around since, 1875, was started by a Prussian immigrant, had several locations around town, and it remained in business until 2010. So 135 years in business, and their sort of evidence of their work was in this house on the window weights. Our recent deconstruction training, our last deconstruction training actually happened inside an 1870s building on Alamo Plaza. And when they were pulling up floors in this building, they saw this lumber stamp, and it took us a really long time to figure out what it said. But it says Martin and Schreiber. And this was a lumber yard that existed here in town, but had ties to Chicago lumber yards. And so this was just another opportunity for us to sort of tie local businesses and local building economy with sort of larger lumber yards, larger practices happening nationwide, which I think is always really fun to sort of situate San Antonio within this larger conversation about the building industry and materials and things like that. And then we also really enjoy sharing sort of a circular economy ethos with the rest of our community as well. During sort of our exploration phase of deconstruction and circular economy program, during the initiative, we sort of strong-armed our mayor Ron Nirenberg into pardoning a turkey that we built out of reclaimed materials. It was a bunch of cedar shakes, and then some just random lumber we had at one of our project sites. And we came up with a sort of faux proclamation for him to sign. It says, whereas Solar Fest organizers have agreed that to the pardoning of a wood turkey constructed from reclaimed building materials, known as Sally the Salvage Turkey, to remind us of the role we all play in achieving waste reduction goals. Now, therefore, I, Ron Nirenberg, Mayor of the City of San Antonio, in recognition thereof, do hereby proclaim Sally the Salvage Turkey pardoned from the landfill. And Sally lives in our office now. She's sort of a deconstruction mascot. And then as part of this event too, we used reclaimed materials to make holiday ornaments. So you can see some images of folks at our little craft table at Solar Fest. Those of you not from San Antonio may not be familiar with Spurs Jesus. This is a local guy who dresses up in Spurs clothing, but also like Jesus, and goes to games and is like an alternate mascot for the Spurs. So he came and made ornaments. He also blessed our turkey. Pretty fun. And then we get to talk to the kiddos and their parents too about salvage and reusing materials, and talk to them about where these materials came from. And then this was our subsequent Solar Fest in 2022. Again, we got Mayor Ron in on it, and this is like the most enormous fiesta medal made from reclaimed materials, and that was the theme for our table this year. So this one took place in like early spring 2022. San Antonio has Fiesta each April, and so our table that year for Solar Fest was helping people make their own Fiesta medals from reclaimed materials. And it's always really fun because I think ostensibly it looks like a kid's activity, but there's always parents and adults that inevitably stop by and make one as well. And we passed out to everybody who participated this handle that says your Fiesta medal came from reclaimed balustrades, and a little bit of information about, you know, how much construction waste is in landfills, and then also give a shout out to partners. So the materials for the wood part of the Fiesta medals was from Picker's Paradise, which is this salvage shop that's been around forever in San Antonio. Long predates our deconstruction ordinance. And then we have a great business here called Spare Parts Center for Creative Reuse that specializes in reclaiming and selling salvaged arts and crafts supplies. And then most recently, we are working with a gallerist in the community. Her name's Maria Williams. Her gallery is called In the Eye of the Beholder. And she contacted artists to ask them to make pieces from reclaimed materials from the Material Innovation Center. And 2 artists signed up to join. At left is the sideboard made by a local artist who primarily uses wood. His name's Daryl Dunn. He's at Dunn Wood on Instagram. And he made this beautiful sideboard out of reclaimed 117 siding, a couple windows that came from a church downtown, and then the inside of the cabinet is all lined with old flooring, like oak flooring. And then at right, we have this sort of like multimedia collage piece called Freedom Ties from Deidre Harden. And she included reclaimed wood, a window pane, some rebar, a roofing panel into this piece. And we're working with the people in our office at City Tower in downtown San Antonio to display these in sort of the public reception space of the building as a way to both sort of highlight 2 Black artists, but also sort of evangelize about using reclaimed materials for creative uses. Okay, Q&A. I see one question in the chat so far. Connor asks, in the case of private owners requesting demo, who owns the salvage materials? What happens to those materials? How does the city ensure compliance? So private owners, it's basically part of the contract with the deconstruction contractor. Sometimes the deconstruction contractor will take those materials and sort of like consider those in his estimate for the cost of deconstruction because they could resell those materials. Sometimes the owners want to keep them on site. We had a project recently that plans to incorporate materials back into the new structure that's being built on site, but they also had a wood shop, so they wanted to take what remained to a wood shop. But with the owner-initiated deconstruction projects, it's up to the owner, the property owner, and the contractor to sort of negotiate that. As far as compliance, part of the the permit review process for deconstruction, it requires the certified deconstruction contractor to submit a pre-deconstruction form outlining the materials that they expect to be salvaged from the site. They give us a percentage, they give us example photos, and then within 10 days of the completion of the deconstruction, they submit a post-deconstruction form, which outlines, it basically shows the materials that were salvaged from the property. So oftentimes we get a picture of like a flatbed trailer with a bunch of like 1x6s on it. But they're required to document that those were salvaged, and they submit all of that with their post-deconstruction form. So yeah, basically the compliance happens as part of the permit review process. And then we ask for information, like if they know where materials are going to end up, we ask for that just because we also want to follow up for, you know, social media purposes, for documentation purposes, things like that. So yeah, but ultimately up to the owner and the contractor. Any other questions? I see familiar names, so I know it's not that you guys are scared of me. So Alicia asks, can the public have links or access to the video animation? Yeah, let me drop a link in the chat real quick. I'm gonna stop sharing. And I will link those. So someone asks, how long was the deconstruction ordinance in the works before it was approved by the city? So city council charged our office with investigating alternatives to demolition in 2017. And so basically since 2017, and then the ordinance was ratified in September 2022. And then Irene asks, can a partial demolition be included in this program? It's something that we encourage, but we can't require it. The deconstruction ordinance only pertains to full demolition of residential structures. So if somebody was, you know, demolishing a detached ADU or detached garage and it fell under the ordinance, that way we can require deconstruction, but our office really doesn't have review purview over partial demolition unless it's in an historic district. If it's on a landmark property, we often see stipulations that say, you know, on-site salvage of materials or incorporation of materials into anything new constructed on the property if there's partial demolition, but we don't really have that codified. The link to the video in the chat, so hopefully you all can see that. But if not, you can email me. It's jessica@sapreservation.com. And then we have another question. On average, what is the price difference between a regular demo and a deconstruction? It really depends on the property and it really depends on the contractor too. I think typically we've been seeing, I'm trying to think of recent site visits that I've been on. I think the last one that I went on, they were quoted around $3,000 for deconstruction, but that also included the contractor retaining some or all of the materials that were salvaged from the site. So it really depends on the parameters of the project. We also have houses where, you know, we lovingly refer to them as Frankenhouses, where maybe there's an historic core to the building, but then there are additions that don't necessarily fall under the deconstruction ordinance. Part of my job is going out and scoping deconstruction for homeowners, partly to help them with the process of collecting quotes so that they make sure that they're getting something accurate as far as what we expect to be retained from these houses. So if something's like a Franken house, we may only require part of the footprint to be deconstructed, and then the rest of it can just be sort of traditional mechanical demolition. So it's really case by case and depends on the scope of the project. But I'd say, like, I recently looked at about a 1,600 square foot house that was a full, like the full footprint required deconstruction, and on site the contractor quoted $3,000 for the deconstruction.
I'm not seeing any more questions right now, but if y'all have any more, go ahead and post them in the Q&A. But in the meantime, I have a question for you. I actually used to live in Savannah, and I volunteered with Repurpose Savannah occasionally. And they're just a nonprofit organization. They're not affiliated with the city in any way. And Savannah, I think, doesn't even have a deconstruction ordinance. At this time, I think maybe they're pushing for that, but they don't have one yet. And I wonder if you think there's like a benefit to this kind of partnership with the city and the ordinance, like kind of going the legal route to push for deconstruction, or if there's, other, pros and cons to just having the nonprofit. If there were other cities in Texas that maybe somebody just wanted to start a nonprofit and do deconstruction, just what do you think the pros and cons are?
Sure. So I think the sort of biggest pro with it being a nonprofit from Repurpose Savannah's perspective is like the resale side of it. So because of their organizational structure, they're able to resell materials like essentially for profit as part of their business model. And we as a city, we're not going to sell the building materials. So that's sort of like the biggest difference. I, of course, am biased because I've only ever worked under an ordinance structure for the city, but I mean, there are of course people who, I mentioned Pickers Paradise, our contractor Emily, who I've mentioned several times, like these are people who have been doing deconstruction in town and salvage prior to it being a requirement for certain structures. But it really, I think, the nice thing about an ordinance is that it's required. So like we're not losing these materials. These materials are required to re-enter the market in some way, whether that's through somebody's wood shop, whether it's through incorporating them into new projects on that site, whether it's like a neighbor showing up during deconstruction and buying it from the lot, like before it's even had to be moved anywhere. It's just that sort of ability to enforce it, I think, is important because we're not losing these materials that are higher quality than what you can get off the shelf now. I mean, I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but these historic materials, they're old growth wood, they're more rot resistant, they're more pest resistant. We can reclaim full wood window systems and reinstall them. Meanwhile, like, the big window is, charging people thousands of dollars for window replacements and things like that. So, I mean, the biggest advantage is just keeping these out of the landfill and keeping these like really beautiful and often very affordable materials still in the market. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
Sometimes I kind of black out
Questions?
next to what it says. So Anonymous asks, has the city been training architects or reaching out to them to encourage them to make use of the recycled material in new construction? Yeah, and I think this is something that like naturally happens anyways. There are architects everywhere. I mean, so I went to school, I went to architecture school at UT, not as a studio architecture student. And I think there's sort of a lot of desire to be like a ground up architect, but you're building new projects only. But the reality of it is that most architects are working on existing structures. So I think there's a lot of sort of natural salvage and reuse that happens on construction sites. We mostly do outreach through our social media. Architects are, of course, welcome to come to our deconstruction contractor trainings. It's hands-on material or hands-on training. So it's actually like dismantling that house. I don't know whether any have gone through off the top of my head. But yeah, I think it's something that we're always encouraging. Our public commission, the Historic and Design Review Commission, or the Compliance and Technical Advisory Board, they often stipulate if there is, for example, an addition made on a house that requires removal of historic materials, they'll often stipulate that those materials be incorporated into whatever the addition is. You know, I think we see that often with wood windows. You know, if you're removing a wood window to make way for an addition, they'll say, well, you have to reincorporate that wood window into the new project. So yeah, I mean, I think there are ways that we do that, not just through deconstruction, but through sort of general design review as well. Yeah. And Michelle asks, do you require certified deconstruction contractors to be recertified every so many years, or is it a one-time certification? Right now, it's a one-time certification. I don't know if that'll change in future, but right now it's just it's a 5-day on-site hands-on training. And then it's followed by one module about sort of business practices, which is, again, courtesy of Repurpose Savannah, talking to folks about what they should consider if they're thinking about starting their own deconstruction and salvage business. And then this year, we're also introducing a permitting module to help folks understand what the permitting process looks like for projects that require deconstruction. Jesus asks, what other cities in Texas or the U.S. Southwest region has a similar type of deconstruction ordinance? I know that, man, this is when I wish stuff were in here. I know that Austin is at least working towards one. Let me look it up real quick. I shouldn't have said this at the beginning, but I've been with the deconstruction program for about 2 months now, and so my recall is not great. So Austin has a construction, demolition, recycling ordinance, and it's for building permits for more than 5,000 square feet of new added or remodeled floor area, and then commercial and multifamily demolition projects of all sizes. So kind of like the inverse of ours. Their deconstruction ordinance requires deconstruction of commercial and multifamily projects, whereas ours is all residential. Right now, up to 4 plexes. After the first, it'll be 8 plexes or smaller residential. And then other than that, I know that there are other cities that are working towards it. That's the only other one I know of in Texas. But we're certainly glad to talk to any of you who are involved with other municipal governments and interested in introducing something similar.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment, so thank you so much, Jessica, for your presentation. It was really great information and good to hear what y'all are doing down there in San Antonio. And thank you all for tuning in to this webinar this afternoon. Our goal is to continue offering educational webinars like this on a monthly basis as a resource for you and as a perk of being a member of Preservation Texas. And I want to let you all know that next month's webinar is going to be presented by Gary Pinkerton, who is going to be discussing his work finding the remains of the historic Trammels Trace Trail, and with a focus on the Epperson's Ferry site in Northeast Texas. So that's going to be happening on October 16th at noon, so mark your calendars. And lastly, if you're interested in presenting one of these webinars, you can reach out to me. My email is my last name, Hunick, HUNICK, at preservationtexas.org. And again, thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a good rest of your week. Bye.